Have you ever felt humiliation so sharp it left you breathless? I never imagined the deepest wound of my life would come not from a stranger, but from my own family. It happened on a night meant for laughter and warmth, a family gathering I once cherished. Instead, I stood in the center of the living room, every eye on me, as my daughter-in-law's words sliced through the air. She smiled, but her voice was cold. "Some people just don't know when they're not needed anymore," she said, glancing at me like I was an old chair cluttering her perfect home. The room went silent. My son, my only child, stood by her side, his face unreadable. He didn't defend me, not even a glance in my direction. My heart pounded, desperate for him to speak up, to show even a flicker of the love I'd poured into raising him alone all those years. But he just looked away, and the ache in my chest deepened. Heat rushed to my cheeks, shame settling deeper than I thought possible. Was this really my life now? Was I so invisible, so unwanted, that my own son would let me be humiliated in front of everyone we loved? I could feel the weight of every stare, every awkward silence pressing down on me. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the judgment in their eyes. All the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the dreams I'd set aside for him. Did they mean nothing now? But here's what no one in that room knew. Not my son, not his wife, not even the relatives who pretended not to notice. There was a secret, a truth so powerful it could tear our family apart. And my brother, the one person who'd always stood by me, was about to reveal it. If only they knew what was coming next. Before that night, before the humiliation and the silence, my life revolved around my son. I raised him alone after his father passed away when he was just a boy. Those early years were a blur of double shifts and late-night bus rides, but I always made it home in time to tuck him in, to hear about his day, to share a quiet moment over a chipped teacup at the kitchen table. He was my world, the reason I kept going when exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole. I wanted him to grow up feeling safe, cherished, and certain that he was never alone, even if it meant I went without. We shared a closeness that felt rare, a bond built on whispered secrets and laughter in the dark. He was thoughtful, always quick to notice when my shoulders sagged or my voice grew thin. Sometimes I'd find a note slipped under my pillow, "I love you, Mom," written in his careful, looping script. I kept every one, tucked in a small wooden box lined with velvet, a private treasure chest of our journey together. As he grew, I watched him become a man I admired, gentle, hard-working, respectful. When he told me he'd met someone special, my heart swelled with hope. I wanted him to have the love and partnership I'd always dreamed of but never quite found. The first time he brought her home, I noticed the way he straightened his tie, the nervous pride in his eyes. She was beautiful, poised, her dress a soft blue that made her seem almost ethereal. I welcomed her warmly, eager to make her feel at home. In those early days, I did everything I could to be the mother-in-law I'd always wished for, a friend, a confidant, someone she could trust. I invited her to lunch, asked about her childhood, listened to her dreams. I wanted her to know she belonged. I even gave her a family heirloom, a delicate gold bracelet that had once circled my own mother's wrist. It was my way of saying, "You're one of us now." We were never wealthy, but our home was rich in other ways. Honesty, kindness, and loyalty were our currency. I taught my son to treat everyone with respect, to help those in need, to stand up for what was right. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. I believed that love and understanding could weather any storm, that family was a safe harbor in a world that could be so cold. But as the seasons changed, so did the air in our home. My son grew quieter, his laughter less frequent, as if something heavy pressed on his heart. My daughter-in-law, once so warm, became distant. Invitations to lunch were politely declined. Phone calls grew brief. I told myself it was normal, that every family adjusts after marriage. I tried to give them space, to support without intruding. Yet sometimes, I'd catch myself lingering in the hallway, listening for their voices, longing for the easy closeness we once shared. Loneliness crept in quietly, settling in the empty spaces of my days. My son had always been my anchor, the steady presence in a life full of uncertainty. The thought of losing him, of being edged out of his new world, sent a chill through me. I'd poured everything into raising him, built my life around his happiness. Now, watching him drift away, I wondered if I'd missed some silent signal, if I was somehow to blame. Still, hope flickered. I believed love would win out, that my son would remember the bond we'd built, the sacrifices woven into every ordinary day. I wanted to believe my daughter-in-law would see me as family, not as an outsider. I clung to memories of laughter around the dinner table, of quiet evenings spent together, of the way he used to reach for my hand when he was small. Every family has its struggles, I told myself. Things would get better if I just kept trying, but nothing could have prepared me for what was to come. The night of the family gathering, I smoothed my dress, took a steadying breath, and walked into that house with hope in my heart, determined to be gracious and loving no matter what. I had no idea that everything I believed about family, about love and loyalty, was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. It started with something so small, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. The four of us, my son, his wife, my brother, and I, sat around the dining table, the air fragrant with cumin and fresh bread. I'd spent the morning preparing my son's favorite dishes, hoping to recapture a little of the warmth we once shared. The clink of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, and then her words. I reached for the serving spoon to offer my daughter-in-law more rice. She glanced at my hand, then at me, and with a tight smile said, "Oh, I'm watching my carbs. Maybe you should too, for your health." The words were light, almost playful, but the sting was immediate. My hand hovered, awkward, before I set the spoon down. My son didn't look up. He just kept eating, as if nothing had happened. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the steam rising from the food, the scrape of a chair as my brother shifted. But as the meal went on, the little jabs continued. When I asked about their holiday plans, she replied, "We'll have to see what my family wants to do first. They're very particular about traditions." The message was clear. I was not the priority. My son nodded, eyes fixed on his plate. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a quiet ache that grew with every passing minute. My brother caught my gaze, his brow furrowing in silent concern. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a comfort, a reminder that someone still saw me. He changed the subject, telling a story from our childhood, and for a moment the tension eased. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for a sign that I was all right. After dinner, the kitchen was filled with the sound of running water and the clatter of dishes. My daughter-in-law leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You know, I think it's time you let us handle things our way. You've done enough." Her tone was soft, but the words landed like stones. I stood there, dish in hand, the warmth of the water doing little to thaw the chill inside me. Was I really so unwanted? Had I overstayed my welcome in my own son's life? Returning to the dining room, I found my son scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet away. My brother quietly joined me at the sink, his hand steadying mine as I nearly dropped a plate. "You okay?" he murmured. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "Just tired," I managed, though the ache in my chest told a different story. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint tick of the clock marking the hours. I replayed every moment, every word searching for meaning. Was I being too sensitive? Was this just the awkwardness of a new family dynamic, or something deeper? The smell of spices still lingered in the air, a bittersweet reminder of what I was trying to hold on to. My brother called the next morning, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't let her get to you," he said. "You've given your whole life to that boy. Don't let anyone make you feel small." His words were a balm, but the ache remained. Pride warred with doubt inside me. I wanted to believe things would get better, that my son would see what was happening and stand up for me. But as the days passed, the distance between us only grew. Family gatherings became something I dreaded. The way my daughter-in-law's eyes flicked over me, assessing, judging. The way my son retreated into silence, leaving me to fend for myself. I missed the days when a simple meal could bring us together, when laughter came easily and love was something we didn't have to question. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything began to change. A single subtle act of disrespect, overlooked by the one person whose support I needed most. My brother saw it even if no one else did. And though I tried to hold on to hope, a part of me knew that something precious was slipping away, one quiet insult at a time. At first, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was just sensitive, still adjusting to the new shape of our family. But as the weeks passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The little slights from my daughter-in-law grew more frequent, each one a tiny cut that never quite healed. She'd correct me in front of guests, roll her eyes when I offered advice, or sigh loudly if I asked a question about their plans. Sometimes she'd make a joke at my expense, and everyone would laugh, everyone except my brother, who would glance at me with a look that said, "I see you. I know this hurts." My son, once so attentive and affectionate, seemed to drift further away with each passing day. He stopped calling just to check in, stopped asking if I needed anything from the store. When we did speak, our conversations felt forced, as if he was always in a hurry to get off the phone. I'd hear his wife's voice in the background, sometimes sharp, sometimes dismissive, and he'd quickly end the call. I missed the days when he'd sit with me over tea, sharing stories about his work or asking for my advice. Now it felt like there was a wall between us, one I couldn't see but could feel every time I reached out. Family gatherings became a minefield. I'd arrive with a dish I'd spent hours preparing, only to have my daughter-in-law announce, "Oh, we don't really eat that anymore," before setting it aside untouched. She'd organize games or activities and forget to include me, or she'd make plans for the family and leave me out entirely. Once, she even told a group of relatives, "We're trying to modernize things around here. Some people just can't keep up." The laughter that followed stung more than I cared to admit. My brother, always observant, started to linger after these gatherings. He'd help me clean up, his hands moving methodically as he watched the doorways and listened to the conversations in the next room. One evening, as I stacked plates, he caught my gaze and raised an eyebrow, a silent question. I managed a small nod, but my hands trembled as I wiped the counter. He changed the subject, telling a story from our childhood, and for a moment, the tension eased. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for a sign that I was all right. After dinner, the kitchen was filled with the sound of running water and the clatter of dishes. My daughter-in-law leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You know, I think it's time you let us handle things our way. You've done enough." Her tone was soft, but the words landed like stones. I stood there, dish in hand, the warmth of the water doing little to thaw the chill inside me. I set the plate down, watching a droplet of water slide down my wrist and fall into the sink. The silence between us was thick, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. Returning to the dining room, I found my son scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet away. My brother quietly joined me at the sink, his hand steadying mine as I nearly dropped a plate. "You okay?" he murmured. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "Just tired," I managed, though the ache in my chest told a different story. That night, I lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the faint tick of the clock marking the hours. I replayed every moment, every word, searching for meaning. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence pressing in on me. I listened to the wind rattling the window, the distant sound of a car passing on the street, and wondered if anyone else felt as invisible as I did. My brother called the next morning, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't let her get to you," he said. "You've given your whole life to that boy. Don't let anyone make you feel small." His words were a balm, but the ache remained. I tried to focus on small comforts, the smell of coffee in the morning, the warmth of sunlight on my hands, but the sense of being pushed aside lingered. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between my son and me grew wider. I found myself replaying every conversation, every awkward silence, searching for clues. My brother became my confidant, the only person I could talk to without fear of judgment. He listened patiently, offering comfort and the occasional joke to lighten my mood. One Sunday, after another tense family dinner, my brother lingered in the driveway as I prepared to leave. "I talked to a friend of mine," he said quietly. "He knows her family. There's talk, nothing concrete yet, but enough to make me wonder." My heart pounded. What kind of talk? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, eyes shadowed by something I couldn't quite read. Let me look into it a bit more. Just keep your eyes open, all right? That night, as I closed the door behind me, the hallway felt colder, the streetlight outside casting long, uncertain shadows. I pressed my hand to the wall, steadying myself, and listened to the quiet. I didn't know what my brother would find or what secrets might come to light, but I knew I wasn't alone. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity, edged with fear. Whatever was hidden beneath the surface, I sensed it was about to change everything. Nights were the hardest. At night, the glow from the street lamp painted shadows that wouldn't let me rest. My thoughts circled endlessly, refusing to settle. In the stillness, the ache of loss pressed in, sharper than I dared admit. I remembered the first time I held my son, his tiny fingers curling around mine, his eyes wide and trusting. I'd promised him then that I would always protect him, give him everything I had. I kept that promise as best I could, even when it meant going without. He never saw my exhaustion. I wanted his world to feel safe, filled with laughter and warmth, not worry and want. There were so many small moments, mornings making pancakes, afternoons at the park, evenings curled up on the couch reading stories. I remembered the way he'd run to me after school, backpack bouncing, eager to share every detail of his day. The pride in his eyes when he brought home a good grade, the way he'd squeeze my hand before a doctor's appointment, seeking comfort. Those memories stitched themselves into my heart, reminders of a bond I thought nothing could break. But now, as I watched him slip further away, I couldn't help but wonder where I'd gone wrong. Had I held on too tightly? Maybe. But letting go felt like tearing away a piece of my own soul. Or was it something else, something I couldn't see, a flaw in myself that I'd never noticed until it was too late? The questions gnawed at me, eroding my confidence, leaving me raw and uncertain. Sometimes I'd stand in his old bedroom, fingers tracing the faded posters, the trophies gathering dust. I'd sit on the edge of his bed, listening for the echo of his laughter, the sound of his feet thundering down the hallway. The room felt smaller now, emptier, as if the years themselves had shrunk it. Did he ever think about those days? Did he miss them the way I did? I thought about the sacrifices, turning down promotions so I could be home after school, skipping meals so he'd have enough, patching up his clothes instead of buying new ones. I never resented any of it. In fact, I wore my sacrifices like a badge of honor, proof of my love. But now, I wondered if he even remembered, if any of it mattered in the face of the distance that had grown between us. There were moments when I'd see a flicker of the boy I'd raised, a gentle touch on my shoulder, a quick smile, a question about my day. But those moments were fleeting, swallowed up by the tension that seemed to hang between us. I missed the easy closeness, the way we could talk for hours about nothing and everything. Now our conversations felt strained, filled with pauses and unspoken words. Change is part of life, I told myself. Children grow up, build lives of their own. But the fear of being left behind, of becoming irrelevant, gnawed at me. I worried that I'd poured so much of myself into being his mother that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. Who was I, if not the person he needed? What purpose did I serve now that he had someone else to lean on? Sometimes I'd replay old arguments in my mind, searching for the moment when things began to shift. Was it something I said? Something I failed to say? Was I too critical, too involved, too eager to help? Or maybe I hadn't done enough, hadn't shown him how much I trusted him to make his own choices. The uncertainty was suffocating. In the quiet, I'd reach for the box of notes he'd written me as a child. I'd unfold each scrap of paper, tracing the words, "I love you, Mom. You're the best. Don't be sad." Those notes were a lifeline, a reminder that once I'd been his whole world. I clung to them, even as I wondered if that world had changed forever. I thought about my own mother, the way she'd comfort me when I was lost or afraid. She used to say, "Love is a risk, but it's always worth it." I tried to hold on to that wisdom, to believe that the love I'd given would find its way back to me. But some nights, the doubt was stronger than the hope. My brother's support was a balm, but even he couldn't fill the emptiness I felt. I envied his certainty, his ability to see things clearly. I wished I could borrow his strength, just for a little while, to carry me through the hardest days. But I knew this was a journey I had to make on my own, to find a way to heal the wounds that no one else could see. Sometimes, in the stillness, I'd think about what my brother had said, that something wasn't right. I tried to push the thought away, but it lingered, heavy and unspoken. What if there was more to this distance than I realized? What if the truth was waiting, just out of sight? As dawn crept through the window, I promised myself I wouldn't give up. Not on my son, not on myself. I would keep reaching out, keep hoping for a way back to the closeness we once shared. And if that wasn't possible, I would learn to stand on my own, to find meaning and purpose beyond the role I'd played for so long. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, guided by the love that had shaped my life. It's strange how cruelty can become routine, how the sharpness of a single insult dulls with repetition, replaced by a steady ache that never quite fades. In the weeks that followed, my daughter-in-law's behavior shifted from subtle to unmistakable. The little jabs and dismissive glances became open disregard, and the walls of my world seemed to close in, brick by brick. It started at a family birthday party. The living room was crowded with relatives, laughter echoing off the walls, the air thick with the scent of cake and coffee. I'd spent the morning baking, wanting to contribute something special. As I set my homemade cake on the table, my daughter-in-law swept in with a store-bought confection, its glossy icing and perfect decorations drawing everyone's attention. "Let's have something modern for a change," she announced, sliding my cake to the side. The guests murmured their approval, and I stood there, hands trembling, pretending not to notice as my offering was quietly ignored. Later, as I tried to join a conversation, she interrupted, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, you wouldn't understand. It's a generational thing." The group laughed, and I felt my cheeks burn. My son, standing nearby, glanced at me but said nothing. I searched his face for a sign, any sign, that he saw what was happening, but he looked away, busying himself with his phone. The pattern repeated itself at every gathering. If I offered advice, she'd roll her eyes and say, "We do things differently now." If I tried to help in the kitchen, she'd shoo me away, telling me to relax and let the younger generation handle it. Once, when I brought a photo album to share old family memories, she snatched it from my hands and set it aside. "We don't need to live in the past," she said, her tone final. The message was clear. I was no longer welcome, not just in her home, but in my own family's story. They pushed me out piece by piece, until I was a ghost, walking through my own family's laughter. My son, once my confidant, became a stranger. He stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped asking about my life. When I reached out, he was polite but distant, his words clipped and formal. I tried to tell myself he was busy, that marriage brought new responsibilities, but the truth gnawed at me. I was being erased, one memory at a time. My brother noticed the change. He started coming by more often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit with me in silence. He'd watch me as I moved around the kitchen, his eyes full of questions he didn't ask. One afternoon, as I poured us tea, he finally spoke. "She's trying to turn him against you," he said quietly. "I see it every time we're together. The way she talks, the way he listens. It's not right." I wanted to argue, to defend my son, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stared at the steam rising from my cup, willing myself not to cry. "What can I do?" I whispered. My brother reached across the table, his hand warm and steady on mine. "You're not alone," he said. "I'm going to find out what's really going on." Sometimes, I'd catch him staring into the distance, his brow furrowed, as if he'd heard something he wasn't ready to tell me yet. He began to pay closer attention, watching for patterns, listening for clues. At a family dinner, he noticed the way my daughter-in-law would whisper to my son, her hand on his arm, her eyes flicking toward me. He saw how my son's posture changed, how he'd stiffen and withdraw whenever I spoke. My brother started asking gentle questions, probing for information without raising suspicion. He talked to relatives, to friends of the family, piecing together a picture that was darker than either of us had imagined. Meanwhile, the manipulation at home intensified. My daughter-in-law began to rewrite the past, telling my son stories that painted me as controlling, overbearing, even selfish. She'd sigh dramatically and say, "Your mother never lets us make our own decisions," or, "She's always interfering." I overheard her once, late at night, her voice low and urgent. "You have to set boundaries with her. She's holding you back." My son listened, silent, his face shadowed with doubt. I tried to reach him, to remind him of the bond we'd shared. I invited him for dinner, just the two of us, hoping to reconnect. He agreed, but when he arrived, he brought his wife. The evening was tense, every conversation a minefield. If I asked about his work, she answered for him. If I reminisced about his childhood, she changed the subject. When I offered dessert, she waved it away. "We're cutting sugar." My son barely met my eyes. When they left, I stood at the window, watching their car disappear into the night, feeling more alone than ever. The public insults became bolder. At a family barbecue, she joked about my old-fashioned ways, mimicking my voice for the crowd. Laughter erupted, and I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. My brother caught my eye, his jaw clenched. Later, he pulled me aside. "She's not just rude, she's trying to erase you," he said. "But I've heard things that don't add up." He told me he'd spoken to someone who knew her from before she married my son. There were rumors, stories of strained relationships, of secrets kept hidden. "I don't have all the details yet," he said, "but I'm not giving up. There's something she doesn't want us to know." The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. I moved through my routines like a shadow, haunted by memories of laughter and love. I questioned everything, my worth, my choices, my place in the world. I wondered if I'd failed as a mother, if I'd somehow brought this on myself. But a small voice in me refused to believe love could be a mistake. Beneath the pain, a spark of anger began to grow. I didn't deserve this. No one did. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet house, my brother called. "I found something," he said, his voice urgent. "I need to talk to you in person." My heart raced. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Hope that the truth, whatever it was, might finally come to light. I waited for him by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on, one by one. When he arrived, he handed me a folder, thick with papers. "Read this," he said. As I opened it, my hands shook. The words on the page blurred, but the meaning was clear. My daughter-in-law had secrets she'd gone to great lengths to hide. My brother looked at me, his eyes fierce. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're not alone, and you're not finished." In that moment, something shifted inside me. The isolation, the doubt, the pain, they were still there, but now they were joined by something else. Resolve. I would not let myself be erased. I would not let my son be lost to lies. Whatever it took, I would fight for the truth, for my family, and for myself. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The day of the family reunion dawned bright and cloudless, but I felt a heaviness in my chest that no sunlight could lift. I stood in front of my closet, hands trembling as I chose a dress. Something simple, dignified, the kind of thing my mother would have worn to a gathering like this. I told myself to be brave, to hold my head high, but my reflection in the mirror looked older, more fragile than I remembered. Still, I smoothed my hair, fastened my necklace, and walked out the door with a quiet resolve burning beneath my nerves. The house was already buzzing when I arrived. Laughter spilled from the backyard, children darted between adults, and the scent of grilled food drifted through the open windows. I carried a tray of homemade pastries, hoping, despite everything, that a taste of the past might soften the edges of the present. My daughter-in-law greeted me at the door, her smile tight and eyes cool. "Oh, you brought something?" she said, glancing at the tray. "We already have plenty, but I suppose we can put it out." She took the pastries and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me standing in the hallway, invisible. I found my son in the backyard, surrounded by cousins and uncles. He looked up as I approached, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hi, Mom," he said, then turned back to his conversation. I hovered at the edge of the group, listening to stories and laughter that seemed to flow around me without ever touching me. Every so often, my daughter-in-law would glance my way, her gaze sharp, as if daring me to speak. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd gathered for a toast. My daughter-in-law took center stage, raising her glass. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," she began, her voice ringing out. "It's so important to celebrate family and to embrace new traditions, even if some people have trouble letting go of the past." She looked directly at me, her meaning unmistakable. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. I felt my cheeks flush, my hands tightening around my glass. My son stood beside her, silent. Someone called for a story, and my daughter-in-law smiled sweetly. "Oh, I'm sure my mother-in-law has plenty of old tales to share. She does love to remind us how things used to be." The words stung, but I forced a smile, refusing to let her see me break. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, she cut me off. "Actually, why don't we let someone else have the spotlight for once?" The crowd laughed again, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. In that moment, I caught sight of my brother at the edge of the yard. He stood apart from the others, a folder tucked under his arm, his expression grave. Our eyes met, and something in his look steadied me. He nodded, just once, and I knew, whatever happened next, I wasn't alone. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. The laughter faded as all eyes turned to him. "If I could have everyone's attention," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "There's something important I need to share." My daughter-in-law's smile faltered. My son looked confused, glancing between us. My brother opened the folder, pulling out a stack of papers. "I've learned some things recently, things that affect this family. I think it's time we all heard the truth." He handed the top page to my son, who took it with trembling hands. Silence fell, thick and heavy. My daughter-in-law's face went pale. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. My brother didn't flinch. "It's the truth about your past, about the things you've hidden from this family, about the lies you've told to keep us apart." My son scanned the page, his eyes widening as he read. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My daughter-in-law reached for the paper, but he pulled it away. "Answer me," he said, louder now, pain and anger mingling in his tone. She stammered, searching for words, but the damage was done. The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. My brother spoke again, his voice steady. "You've tried to turn this family against each other. You've lied, manipulated, and hurt the people who welcomed you in good faith. That ends today." For a moment, no one moved. I stood frozen, hope and despair warring inside me. Part of me wanted to run, to escape the eyes and whispers, but another part, the part that had survived sleepless nights and silent heartbreak, held firm. I looked at my son, saw the confusion and betrayal in his eyes, and felt a surge of grief for the boy I'd raised. The man I barely recognized. My daughter-in-law tried to defend herself, her words tumbling out in a rush. "You don't understand, I was just..." But my brother cut her off. "No more excuses, no more lies," he turned to the family. "We all deserve honesty. We all deserve respect." The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt every eye on me, waiting to see if I would crumble. But I stood tall, drawing strength from my brother's presence, from the truth finally laid bare. My son looked at me, tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered. I reached for his hand, and for the first time in months, he didn't pull away. The confrontation left the family shaken, the air thick with questions and regret. Some relatives offered quiet support, others kept their distance, unsure where to stand. My daughter-in-law slipped away, her mask of confidence shattered. My brother stayed by my side, a steady anchor in the storm. As the sun set and the crowd began to disperse, I stood in the fading light, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. The truth had come at a cost, but it had also set me free. For the first time in a long while, I felt something like hope, a fragile, flickering thing, but real. The battle between hope and despair wasn't over, but I knew now which side I was fighting for. After the confrontation, the house felt colder than ever. The laughter and chatter that had filled the rooms only hours before were replaced by a heavy, uneasy silence. I moved through the empty kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the tile, the scent of pastries and grilled food lingering in the air like a memory I couldn't quite touch. The tray of homemade pastries sat untouched on the counter, a silent testament to everything I'd tried and failed to offer. I replayed the scene in my mind, over and over, the shock on my son's face, the anger in my daughter-in-law's voice, the hush that fell over the family as my brother revealed the truth. For a moment, I'd thought the truth would set us free, that my son would see through the lies and come back to me. But as the evening wore on, hope faded, replaced by a hollow ache that settled deep in my chest. My son found me in the hallway, his face drawn and tired. "Mom, I need some time to think," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is all so much." He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't offer comfort. He just stood there, torn between two worlds, and I realized with a sinking heart that I was no longer the center of his. I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and watched as he walked away, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a choice he didn't want to make. The family was divided. Some relatives whispered words of support, squeezing my hand or offering a sad smile. Others avoided my gaze, their loyalty uncertain, their faces closed. My daughter-in-law retreated to a guest room, slamming the door behind her. My brother tried to reassure me, but even his presence couldn't fill the emptiness that had opened inside me. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the house silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with my eyes, feeling smaller than I ever had before. I thought about packing a bag, about leaving this place behind and starting over somewhere no one knew my name. The idea was tempting, a clean slate, a chance to escape the pain and disappointment that clung to every corner of this house. But as I sat there, the weight of years pressed down on me. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up with my son when he was sick, the birthdays I'd planned, the sacrifices I'd made. I thought about the love I'd poured into this family, the hope I'd carried through every hardship. Was it all for nothing? Had I failed so completely that there was nothing left to salvage? Tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and hot. I let them fall, too tired to wipe them away. I wondered if anyone would notice if I disappeared, if my absence would matter to anyone but my brother. The loneliness was suffocating, a darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. I tried to remember the woman I used to be, the mother who could fix any problem, who could make her son laugh even on the worst days. But she felt distant now, a shadow I could barely reach. I wondered if I'd ever find her again, or if she was lost for good. My brother knocked softly on the door, his voice gentle. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said. I wanted to believe him, but the pain was too raw, the wound too deep. "I just need some time," I whispered, not trusting myself to say more. He left me with a cup of tea, the steam curling in the dim light. I wrapped my hands around it, searching for warmth, for comfort, for anything that might remind me I was still here. I thought about my son, about the boy who used to run to me with open arms, and wondered if he would ever come back. As the night wore on, I drifted between sleep and waking, haunted by dreams of laughter and loss. I saw my son as a child, his face bright with joy, and then as a man, his eyes clouded with doubt. I reached for him, but he slipped away, always just out of reach. Morning came, pale and gray. I rose from bed, my body heavy, my heart numb. I moved through the house like a ghost, tidying up the remnants of the party, erasing the evidence of a night that had changed everything. I paused in the doorway of my son's old room, the memories pressing in on me, bittersweet and sharp. For the first time, I truly considered giving up, letting go of the hope that had carried me this far. Maybe it was time to stop fighting, to accept that some things couldn't be fixed, no matter how much love you poured into them. Maybe it was time to let go. But even as I stood on the edge of surrender, a small voice inside me refused to be silenced. It whispered of resilience, of the strength that had carried me through every storm. I didn't know what the future held, or if my family would ever be whole again. But I knew I wasn't ready to disappear, not yet. Not while there was still a chance, however small, that love could find its way back. The morning after the confrontation, I moved through the house in a daze, the events of the night before replaying in my mind like a film I couldn't turn off. The air felt heavy, thick with the residue of harsh words and broken trust. I found myself standing at the kitchen window, watching the world outside come to life. Neighbors walking dogs, children riding bikes, the sun rising as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything was different. My brother arrived just after breakfast, his knock gentle but insistent. He carried with him a quiet strength, the kind that had always made me feel safe, even when we were children. He set a bag of groceries on the counter and poured us both a cup of coffee. For a while, we sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, he spoke. "You can't let this break you," he said, his voice steady. "You've spent your whole life putting others first. It's time to stand up for yourself." I shook my head, staring into my cup. "I don't know how," I admitted. "I feel like I've lost everything. My son, my family, my place in this world." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "You haven't lost yourself. That's what matters. And you haven't lost me. We're going to get through this together." His words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of despair. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. We talked for hours, piecing together everything we knew. My brother laid out the evidence he'd gathered, documents, messages, stories from people who'd known my daughter-in-law before she entered our lives. The truth was complicated, tangled in secrets and old wounds. But it was clear enough. She had manipulated not just my son, but the entire family, spinning a web of lies to protect herself and her own interests. "We can't let this destroy us," my brother said. "But we also can't let her keep hurting you or anyone else. The truth needs to come out, but it has to be done carefully. We need to protect the family, especially your son. He's hurting too, even if he can't show it." I nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I didn't want revenge. I wanted healing. I wanted my son to see the truth, not out of anger, but out of love. I wanted to restore dignity, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been caught in the crossfire. Together, we made a plan. My brother would speak to a few trusted relatives, sharing the evidence quietly, making sure they understood the full story before rumors could twist it further. I would write a letter to my son, pouring out my heart in words I could never seem to say aloud. I would tell him about my fears, my hopes, and the love that had shaped every decision I'd ever made. I would ask him to listen, not just to me, but to his own heart. We decided to call a family meeting, not in anger, but in the spirit of honesty and reconciliation. My brother would present the facts calmly and clearly, while I would speak my truth, not as a victim, but as a mother who refused to be erased. We agreed there would be no shouting, no accusations, only the quiet strength of truth and the hope that it could begin to heal what had been broken. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with anxiety and preparation. I wrote and rewrote my letter, searching for the right words. My brother met with relatives, answering their questions, reassuring them that this was about protecting the family, not tearing it apart. Slowly, support began to build. A cousin called to say she'd noticed the changes too. An aunt offered to help mediate. Even those who had kept their distance began to reach out, their voices tentative but sincere. On the morning of the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my dress, willing my hands to stop shaking. My brother squeezed my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "No matter what happens, you have nothing to be ashamed of." As the family gathered in the living room, I felt a wave of nerves, but also a sense of purpose. My brother began, laying out the facts with calm authority. He spoke not just of what he'd discovered, but of the importance of honesty, respect, and forgiveness. Then it was my turn. I read my letter, my voice trembling at first, then growing steadier as I spoke of love, loss, and the hope for a new beginning. I looked at my son, saw the pain and confusion in his eyes, and knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But I also saw a glimmer of understanding, a crack in the wall that had grown between us. When I finished, the room was silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then my brother spoke again, reminding everyone that families are built not on perfection, but on the willingness to face hard truths together. As the meeting ended, I felt lighter, as if a burden I'd carried for years had finally been set down. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew I had done what I could to protect my family and restore my own dignity. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that healing was possible, not just for me, but for all of us. The day of the family gathering arrived with a strange sense of anticipation, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I woke early, unable to sleep, and moved through the house in a quiet flurry, straightening cushions, setting out plates, making sure every detail was in place. My brother arrived just after noon, his presence steady and reassuring. He gave me a nod, a silent promise that I wouldn't face this alone. By late afternoon, the house was full. Relatives filled the living room and spilled out onto the porch, their voices rising and falling in a familiar chorus. My son and daughter-in-law arrived together, their faces carefully composed. She wore a bright dress and a practiced smile, but her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. My son looked tired, shadows under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. We waited until everyone had settled, the hum of conversation filling the air. My brother stood and cleared his throat, commanding attention with a quiet authority that made the room fall silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm but resolute. "There are things that need to be said today, truths that have been hidden for too long. I ask that you listen with open hearts." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. My daughter-in-law stiffened, her hand tightening on my son's arm. My brother opened the folder he'd brought, the same one he'd shown me days before. He began to speak, laying out the facts with careful precision. Details about my daughter-in-law's past, the lies she'd told, the manipulations that had driven wedges between us all. He spoke of the stories she'd spun to isolate me, the way she'd twisted my words and intentions, the secrets she'd kept from my son and the rest of the family. He didn't raise his voice or accuse. He simply let the truth speak for itself, each revelation landing with the weight of undeniable evidence. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. She tried to interrupt, but my brother held up a hand. "You'll have your chance to speak," he said gently. "But first, everyone deserves to know what's been happening." My son sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the papers in my brother's hands. As the truth unfolded, I watched his expression shift. Confusion, disbelief, then a dawning horror as he realized the extent of the deception. The room was silent except for my brother's voice and the occasional gasp from a relative as another secret came to light. When my brother finished, he turned to my son. "You deserve honesty," he said. "You deserve to know who's been standing by you and who's been standing in your way." My son looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, is it true? All of it?" His voice was raw, the pain in it almost unbearable. I nodded, unable to speak, my own eyes shining with unshed tears. My daughter-in-law stood abruptly, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. I was just trying to protect us. I never meant to hurt anyone." She looked around the room, searching for sympathy, but found only wary faces and a wall of silence. My brother spoke again, his tone gentle but firm. "We all make mistakes, but hiding the truth, manipulating those who love you, that's not protection. That's fear, and it's time to let it go." The confrontation that followed was raw and unfiltered. My son turned to his wife, his voice shaking. "Why? Why would you do this? Why would you turn me against my own mother?" She tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a rush, excuses, half-truths, desperate justifications. But the damage was done. The trust that had once bound us together had been shattered, and no amount of pleading could put it back together. Relatives began to speak up, some with anger, others with sorrow. An aunt recalled moments when she'd seen the manipulation, but hadn't wanted to believe it. A cousin admitted to feeling caught in the middle, unsure who to trust. The room became a chorus of voices, some seeking understanding, others demanding accountability. Through it all, I stood quietly, my heart pounding. I wanted to reach for my son, to comfort him, but I knew he needed to find his own way through the pain. My brother stayed close, a steady presence at my side. Finally, my son turned to me, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have seen it. I should have listened to you." He reached for my hand, and I took it, feeling the warmth of his grip, the tremor of his regret. "I let you down," he whispered. I squeezed his hand, my own voice trembling. "You're my son. I've loved you every day of your life. Nothing can change that. We've both been hurt, but we can heal if we're honest, if we forgive." My daughter-in-law stood apart, her shoulders slumped. For a moment, she looked like a lost child, stripped of all her defenses. She tried one last time to plead her case, but the family was no longer willing to look away. My brother spoke softly. You need to take responsibility. If you want to be part of this family, it has to start with the truth. Tears streamed down her face as she finally admitted what she'd done. How fear and insecurity had driven her to lie. How she'd felt threatened by the closeness between my son and me. Her confession was messy, full of pain and regret, but it was real. The room was silent as she finished, the weight of her words settling over us all. There were no easy answers, no instant forgiveness. Some relatives offered comfort, others kept their distance, unsure how to move forward. But in that moment something shifted. The truth, once hidden in shadows, now stood in the open, raw and undeniable. As the gathering drew to a close, my son hugged me tightly, his tears soaking my shoulder. I want to make things right, he said. I want us to be a family again. I held him close, feeling the years of pain and misunderstanding begin to melt away. My brother put an arm around both of us, his voice gentle. Families break, but they can also heal. It takes time, and it takes truth. As the sun set outside, casting golden light through the windows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The confrontation had been painful, but it had also been necessary. The secrets that had divided us were finally out in the open, and with them came the possibility of forgiveness, of rebuilding, of hope. We stood together in the fading light, mother, son, brother, bound not by perfection, but by the courage to face the truth and the willingness to begin again. The house emptied slowly after the confrontation, as if everyone was reluctant to step back into the world with the weight of what had just happened. My daughter-in-law was the first to leave, her face streaked with tears, her steps hurried and uncertain. She didn't look back as she slipped out the door, and for a long moment, the only sound in the house was the soft click of it closing behind her. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and relief. I had never wished her harm, only honesty. Now, as she disappeared down the walk, I wondered if she would ever find her own peace. My son lingered in the living room, shoulders hunched, eyes red. He sat on the edge of the couch, twisting his wedding ring, lost in thought. I wanted to reach for him, to comfort him as I had when he was a child, but I knew this was a pain he had to face himself. My brother sat nearby, a quiet anchor, offering silent support. Eventually, my son spoke, his voice raw. I'm so sorry, Mom. I let her come between us. I let myself believe things that weren't true. He looked up at me, shame and regret etched deep in his face. Can you ever forgive me? I crossed the room and sat beside him, taking his hand in mine. You're my son, I said softly. I've loved you through every joy and every mistake. We've both been hurt, but we're still here. That's what matters. Tears welled in his eyes, and he leaned into me, letting himself be held. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt the old closeness return. A fragile, tentative thing, but real. The days that followed were quiet, filled with small gestures of healing. My son called every morning just to check in. He came by for dinner, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just his company. We talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. There were awkward silences, moments when the pain resurfaced, but we faced them together, refusing to let the past define us. My daughter-in-law stayed away, sending a letter instead of returning in person. In it, she apologized, not just to me but to the whole family. She admitted her fears, her jealousy, the lies she'd told. She asked for forgiveness, but didn't expect it. I read her words with a heavy heart, wishing things could have been different, but knowing that some wounds take time to heal. The family, too, began to mend. Relatives who had kept their distance reached out, offering apologies and support. Old resentments faded, replaced by a cautious hope. My brother remained a steady presence, always ready with a kind word or a gentle nudge when I needed it most. Together, we found a new rhythm, one built on honesty and the hard-won understanding that love is not always easy, but it is always worth fighting for. In the quiet moments, I reflected on everything that had happened. I thought about the years I'd spent pouring myself into my family, the sacrifices I'd made, the pain of being pushed aside. I realized that my worth was not defined by anyone else's approval, not my son's, not my daughter-in-law's, not even the family's. I was enough, just as I was. I learned that forgiveness is not a single act, but a choice made over and over again. It is the decision to let go of anger, to release the grip of old hurts, and to open the door to healing. I forgave my son, not because he asked, but because I needed to free myself from the bitterness that threatened to take root. I forgave my daughter-in-law too in my own way, recognizing that her actions came from fear, not malice. Most of all, I forgave myself. For the mistakes I'd made, for the times I doubted my own strength, for the moments when I'd almost given up. I realized that resilience is not about never falling, but about finding the courage to stand up again, no matter how many times life knocks you down. As the weeks passed, the house felt warmer, lighter. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then growing stronger. My son and I found new ways to connect, building memories that belonged to us alone. My brother and I shared quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun set and the world settle into peace. I knew the road ahead would not always be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the old pain resurfaced. But I also knew that we had survived the worst, and that together we could face whatever came next. Looking back, I saw not just the pain, but the growth. I saw a family that had been tested and had chosen, in the end, to heal. I saw a woman who had learned to stand tall, to speak her truth, and to trust in her own worth. And I saw hope, a quiet, steady light that refused to be extinguished. In the end, that was the greatest lesson of all. That love, no matter how battered or bruised, can always find its way home. The weeks after the storm felt like waking up after a long, restless sleep. The air in the house was different, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. I moved through my days with a new sense of purpose, no longer weighed down by the fear of being unwanted or unseen. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a life that belonged to me, not just to the roles I'd played for others. I started with small things. I rearranged the living room, moving the old armchair to a sunny corner where I could read in the afternoons. I planted flowers in the garden, their bright colors a daily reminder that beauty could return even after the harshest winter. I cooked for myself, not out of duty, but for the simple pleasure of it, experimenting with new recipes, savoring the flavors, reclaiming the kitchen as my own. Setting boundaries was harder, but necessary. When my son called, I answered with warmth, but I no longer dropped everything to accommodate his schedule. If he wanted to visit, I welcomed him gladly, but I made it clear that my time was valuable too. At first, he seemed surprised by this change, but soon he began to respect it, even admire it. Our conversations grew more honest, less burdened by guilt or expectation. We talked about the past, but also about the future, about dreams, plans, and the kind of relationship we both wanted to build. There were moments of awkwardness, of course. Old habits die hard, and sometimes I caught myself slipping into the role of caretaker, eager to fix every problem or smooth every rough edge. But each time I reminded myself that love does not mean losing yourself. I learned to listen without trying to solve, to offer support without sacrificing my own needs. My son, in turn, began to see me not just as his mother, but as a person with her own hopes and boundaries. My brother remained my steadfast ally. We shared long walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing. He encouraged me to try new things, to join a book club, to take a painting class, to travel to the seaside town we'd always dreamed of visiting as children. With his gentle nudges, I rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten, my curiosity, my laughter, my quiet strength. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the world go by, my brother turned to me and said, "You know, I've always admired your resilience. You bend, but you never break." His words settled over me like a blessing, and I realized he was right. I had survived heartbreak, betrayal, and loneliness, but I had not been defeated. I had found a way to stand tall, to reclaim my life, and to move forward with grace. I began to reach out to others too. I volunteered at the local community center, helping organize events for seniors and families. I found joy in connecting with people who had their own stories of loss and renewal. We shared laughter, tears, and the quiet understanding that comes from having weathered life's storms. In their company, I felt less alone, more a part of something larger than myself. My relationship with my son continued to heal. He apologized often, sometimes in words, sometimes in actions. A bouquet of flowers left on my doorstep, a handwritten note tucked into my mailbox, a simple, "I love you, Mom," whispered at the end of a visit. I forgave him, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Forgiveness, I learned, is a gift you give yourself as much as to others. We created new traditions. Sunday dinners filled with laughter, walks in the park, movie nights where we argued over which film to watch. The past was still there, a shadow that sometimes crept in, but it no longer defined us. We were building something new, something stronger, brick by brick. I also learned to forgive my daughter-in-law, though it took time. I understood now that her actions had come from a place of fear and insecurity, not malice. I wished her well, hoping she would find her own path to healing. I let go of the anger, choosing instead to focus on the love that remained. Most importantly, I learned to love myself again. I looked in the mirror and saw not just a mother or a sister, but a woman who had survived, who had grown, who had found her voice. I embraced my age, my wisdom, my scars. I celebrated the life I had built, the family I had fought for, and the future that still waited for me. As the seasons changed and the days grew longer, I felt a quiet joy settle in my heart. I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had found: strength, hope, and the courage to begin again. My story was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. And as I sat in my sunlit corner, a book in my lap, and the scent of flowers drifting through the open window, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be, whole, hopeful, and finally, truly free. As I settled into my new rhythm, I found myself drawn to the stories of others, women and men who, like me, had weathered storms within their own families. It started at the community center, where I volunteered a few afternoons each week. At first, I was content to serve tea, arrange chairs, and listen quietly as people shared their troubles. But soon, I realized how many of us carried the same wounds: the ache of betrayal, the sting of being misunderstood, the fear of losing those we loved most. One afternoon, a woman named Helen sat beside me after a support group meeting. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I don't know how to move on," she whispered. "My daughter won't speak to me. I feel like I've lost everything." I listened, really listened, and when she finished, I reached for her hand. "You're not alone," I told her. "It hurts, but it won't always hurt this much. You're stronger than you think." Word spread quietly that I was someone who understood. People began to seek me out, at the center, in the grocery store, even on walks through the park. They shared their stories, and I shared mine, not as a victim, but as someone who had found a way through. I offered advice when asked, but more often I simply listened, holding space for their pain and their hope. We formed a small circle, a patchwork family of sorts. We met for coffee, exchanged phone calls, sent each other notes of encouragement. We celebrated small victories: a reconciled phone call, a letter received, a day when the sadness felt lighter. In their company, I found a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I was missing. Our wounds were different, but our resilience was the same. I discovered that helping others heal helped me heal too. Each time I offered comfort, I felt my own heart grow lighter. Each time I witnessed someone else's courage, I remembered my own. I realized that community isn't just about blood or marriage. It's about showing up for each other, about kindness, about the willingness to listen and to care. My brother joined us sometimes, sharing his own perspective and gentle humor. He reminded us that family can be chosen, that support can come from unexpected places. Together, we built something new, a network of trust, understanding, and hope. Looking back, I saw how far I'd come. I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I could give. I had found purpose in connection, strength in vulnerability, and joy in the simple act of being there for someone else. In the end, I realized that healing is rarely a solitary journey. We need each other, our stories, our compassion, our willingness to reach out. And as I walked home from the center, the sun warm on my face, I felt grateful for the community I had found, and for the chance to help others find their way, too. If there's one lesson my journey has taught me, it's that self-respect is not a luxury, it's a necessity. For years, I believed that loving my family meant sacrificing my own needs, staying silent to keep the peace, and accepting less than I deserved. But I've learned that true loyalty isn't about losing yourself for others. It's about standing up for what's right, even when your voice shakes. It's about loving fiercely, but also knowing when to draw boundaries and protect your own heart. Family can be our greatest source of joy, but it can also be the place where we're tested the most. Betrayal, misunderstanding, and pain are part of every family story. What matters is how we respond, whether we let those wounds define us or whether we choose to heal, to forgive, and to grow stronger. I found my strength not by fighting alone, but by reaching out, by accepting help, and by believing that I was worthy of love and respect. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, betrayed, or pushed aside, I want you to know you are not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, to speak your truth, and to seek the support you deserve. Healing is possible, even after the deepest hurt. Sometimes it begins with a single act of courage, a conversation, a boundary, a moment of honesty. I'd love to hear your story. Have you faced a moment when you had to choose yourself, even when it was hard? Have you found strength in unexpected places, or rebuilt a relationship after it was broken? Share your experiences in the comments below. Let's support each other, learn from each other, and remind ourselves that we are stronger together. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join our community. Your support means the world to me, and it helps others find these stories of hope and resilience. And don't miss the next episode, where I'll share another true story of family, secrets, and the power of standing up for what's right. Until then, remember, you are worthy, you are strong, and your story is far from over.